Good evening. It's Monday night, the day of your midterm exam. My printer is acting out and making some noises. So she's not about to end, and the cat is here. And I'm here feeling a little better. So see how it goes. We are finished now with the midterms. I haven't graded them all yet, but there's some good news. Your multiple choice looks really good. I've never seen something like this. Anyways, maybe it was just too easy, but anyway, no complaints, no complaints. This is what I said is going to be. This is going to be. No changing of rules in the middle of the course. So, anyways, let's recap where we are. And last time on our day 5, we're doing World War I and the aftermath, which was called the Roaring Twenties. And now we're doing 2 chapters together, and that would be the Great Depression and World War II. So, where to start? Okay, I hope you have some previous knowledge of World War I and World War II. But because that's part of, this is a 200 level history course. So I think it usually, well, I'm not sure if it requires some sort of preparation for it. But anyways, be that as it may, we're going to start from the scratch here. And of course, focus not on the world aspects of World War II, and what happened in Europe and in Russia, that is Soviet Union, and so on and so forth, but where United States actually took part. And United States took part in 2 fronts, 2 areas of operation of World War II. One was in the Pacific, fighting Japan, and the other one was in first in Africa, fighting Italy and Germany, and then in Western Europe after the landing of Normandy in 1944, which brought the Hitler's regime to its end on May the 9th, 1945. So, anyways, couple of things about these 2 wars, especially for America. These 2 wars are connected. World War I was a big deal for a lot of Americans, and you'll remember in one of the questions and in the quiz and so on and so forth, when you did the reading of the chapter, a lot of people in America, especially Republicans during the 1920s, wanted to return to American isolationism. And their logic was strong. They said, from the foundation of the Republic, from the first president, America stood apart, stood at a distance from European wars. There were many European wars in the 19th century and earlier, and now in the 20th century. And we're just better off if we don't take part in it. And the other people like Woodrow Wilson, who were interventionists, who said, well, following the logic of English Renaissance poet, no man is an island. And in this case, America, United States is not an island, even though America, technically speaking, as a continent, is an island. But anyways, no man is an island, and never ask for whom the bells toll, they toll for you. So in other words, when somebody is dying out there in Europe, in Japan, they're coming for you. That was the message. Which is also, a very, very strong argument to be made. And that's the argument that prevailed. But wars are very complicated things. And as I said, World War I and World War II are connected. They're really the same war in continuation. The basic conflict that underlined both conflict was both, wars, world conflagrations, was the conflict between the British Empire and Germany. Not just Great Britain, but the British Empire and Germany. German Empire, although British Empire was much bigger and stronger than the German Empire. And the British Empire held colonies, held India under its possession, had almost the whole of East Africa, from Egypt down to Cape in the south, to South Africa. Important parts of West Africa, like Nigeria, and so on and so forth. And of course, dominions of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Rhodesia. India, that was a British colony, was much bigger than the current state of India. British India included Pakistan, current state of India, Bangladesh, and Burma all together. And bits and pieces in China, like Hong Kong, the city of Hong Kong in China, the Straits of Malaya, Singapore. So, British Empire was by far the largest empire in world history, and it was challenged by Germany. So this aspect of World War I and II is often forgotten. We often focus on the most obvious, that Hitler was an evil person and committed a lot of atrocities, and including millions of dead in the Holocaust, tried to exterminate the Jews, killed a lot of people in Eastern Europe, not just Jews but of Slavic origin, who he considered to be of an inferior race. And so there are various aspects of this. A couple of things that are important for America, and that is, America became a financially dominant power after World War I. And this was the work of Woodrow Wilson and the bankers of New York. And there was a system of reparations that was established after World War I that at first fueled a lot of controversies, and in the beginning, in 1819, in 1920, and then when this issue was solved and these reparations kind of trying to circulate, the thing was, since the Germans massacred a lot of people in France, Belgium was devastated as a country. So, and this was not an unusual thing. The Germans had to pay the reparations. They complained about it, of course, because there was a change of government in Germany. The war was fought by the Imperial Germany, by Kaiser Wilhelm, and the new socialist government, social democratic government of Chancellor Ebert said, well, we were anti-war from the very beginning. Now you want us to pay? And well, the answer was yes. The government might have changed, but the state, made these damages, and countries like Belgium and France, in particular, needed to be compensated. The British also required, asked for compensation. And for example, a few colonies that Germany had after World War I, before World War I, that is, were taken over by Britain. Couple of states in Africa that were now states in Africa that used to be German colonies. So, anyways, there was a flow. What I'm trying to say, there was a flow of money from Germany towards France and Great Britain. Germany was paying reparations. Great Britain and France paid that money took that money and paid off the debt that they owned to the United States of America, either private banks or government debt. And then these monies started, circulated, and for the first time, maybe in human history, that you have a very, very interconnected global economy. There were two elements to it, Europe on the one hand, including Germany, Italy, France, United Kingdom. There was, there was this international system that was kind of greased with the reparations money, and it ran on the debt that France and United Kingdom accumulated during World War One, and it sort of greased the American economy. So therefore, 1920s were extremely successful from the economic point of view. That's why they were calling the Roaring Twenties, and that's the stuff that we covered before. And then, well, that's a big deal. That's part of your IDs. Then the Great Depression came. It came in 1929 as a sudden crash of the market in New York on Wall Street. And then it cascaded through the system. So once the New York Stock Exchange collapsed, the next in line was London. And London held a little bit, and then it collapsed too. And then Paris seems to have held a little bit longer and collapsed too. And because these two collapsed, the German economy was in trouble. And because German economy was in trouble, Eastern European economies were in trouble. For example, Eastern European, Germany is an industrial state, not just industrious. Yes, Germans are industrious in general, like everybody. There are always exceptions, but it's an industrial state. It always was, and then even today, it's still one of the greatest exporters of manufacturing goods in the world. So, but as far as agriculture, most of agriculture products to Germany came from Eastern European countries like Poland, Romania, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia. Those were countries that were created after World War One on the principle of national self-determination. Germans wanted to be wanted to be their backyard and wanted to dominate Eastern Europe. And that's why World War I was fought, and these countries won their independence. But once the German economy collapsed and Germany could not export any more industrial goods to places like France, Britain, and United States, then Germany cannot pay those reparations anymore, and also cannot buy the agricultural goods from Eastern European countries, and Eastern European countries cannot sell their agricultural goods. So there was a first sort of a global economic recession, or we say depression. And the difference between recession and depression is, well, normally we assume that there is economic growth a little bit every year or so, as a ballpark figure. People say the economy usually grows about 2% every year. But if it doesn't, then we call it recession. So it falls down, and if it goes in the minus, it shrinks instead of expanding for 2%, then we call it recession. And if the recession is too big, there is some sort of an arbitrary point, like how much of a drop in economic activity you need to have in order to have that something defined as a depression. So it's substantial. The unemployment in United States would reach. Nobody knows for sure unemployment. These figures are kind of hard to find, but 20-25% of the population was unemployed. So therefore, we have this Great Depression happening. Starts in 1929, and it doesn't stop all the way to the beginning of World War II in 1939. 1939, 1940. So officially World War II started in September 1st, 1939. Now, so this is your first ID. John Maynard Keynes and Milton Friedman's explanation of the Great Depression. And these are actually two questions, so you actually have 6 IDs. There were 2 explanations for the Great Depression. One is a left wing, and the other one is a right wing. Although this is a little bit exaggerating, neither John Maynard Keynes was a huge leftist. He was a kind of a social democrat, but not a very radical communist or anything of that sort. And Milton Friedman was more of a libertarian than anything else. So, but we have these 2 explanations. You will see actually that Milton Friedman is much younger than Maynard Keynes. And Milton Friedman actually inherited the views from a so-called Austrian School of Economics. Those are the people who are contemporary with John Maynard Keynes, and they argued with him. And the thing was that Keynes's explanation was that the economic crash happened because there was a lack of demand. People didn't have money to buy stuff. So therefore, the cure comes from the explanation. So, if you say, okay, this fellow is ill and he has COVID, then, treatment is going to be determined accordingly. Or if you say, no, that's something else, heart disease, well, the treatment is going to be different. So economists debate these things about, and Maynard Keynes, it's actually that, he says that Keynes says that it's a characteristic of free market economy to go boom and bust. And during the boom cycle, people make more and more stuff, and suddenly people don't want to buy things anymore. And once that happens, the bubble collapses and the prices collapse. So therefore, the cure is to give people more money so they can go out and buy and keep the industry, the economy going. That's Keynes. And this was a dominant explanation in the 1930s. On this platform, Franklin Roosevelt won the elections and implemented that platform throughout his 4 terms in office. So anyways, Milton Friedman has a different kind of explanation for it. And he doesn't believe that the depression is a systemic problem. The system of free market capitalism is, should go to these depressions, but that these cycles could be regulated and mitigated by what we call fiscal policy. And fiscal policy we had in this course a lot when we were talking about the silver and the gold standard and the greenbacks and stuff of that sort. So, in other words, fiscal policy are the mechanisms through which the central bank makes available money to commercial banks. And so the central bank can manipulate the interest rate, increase it or lower it. If it increases the interest rate, the supply of money goes down because less and less commercial banks borrow from the central bank. And if the interest rates go down, then people borrow more because it's cheap money. You'll pay it off with 1% interest, or now we have 0% interest. Just borrow, take it. You'll pay it back. Anyways, so Milton Friedman argued that no, this was not a systemic problem with Great Depression, but it was actually a problem of fiscal policy. So anyways, those are the two things that, I'd like you to research as far as the Great Depression goes. And which brings us to other people, John Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath, which indicates the problems of American Midwest farmers in the American Midwest, and policies that were introduced by President Hoover, who tightened the money supply and thought that which actually made the Depression even worse. A lot of people that said that instead of making just a regular correction that happens in the market by wrong fiscal policies, that they made it worse. But the problem was that a lot of farmers in the South and Midwest, especially Oklahoma, Arkansas, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, places of that sort in the Midwest, they were stretched too thin and they went bankrupt. And when there was a soil exhaustion, pardon me. This time I have my water here when the cough comes. So there was a soil exhaustion problem, and a lot of farmers in the Midwest went bankrupt, and they went to California. So a lot of people think that most population in California comes from the gold rush in the 19th century, which is, there were a lot of people who came with the gold rush. But actually, much larger chunk of the population in California are former bankrupt peasants, farmers from the Midwest and South, who went there in California and where soil was better, and because of the climate, agriculture is much easier, and your chances of survival as a farmer are much better. And this is confirmed by the fact that California is the largest food producer in the country, and the reason for it is because it's California. It's the nice weather and the hot, areas of the Central Valley with the fertile land between the mountains, and ideal climate for farming. So, anyways, that's John Steinbeck and his famous novel Grapes of Wrath. Interestingly enough, Bruce Springsteen also made a summary of the whole novel through an album, so created several songs that are all taken out of the Grapes of Wrath. So I didn't say this, but if you want to cheat on anyways, let me put it this way, if you want a short summary and a beautiful summary that Bruce Springsteen made of this novel, you can listen to a couple of his songs that are, picking up certain episodes from the novel and turning them into songs. Anyways, be it as it may. So, but overall, in the 1930s and already in the 1920s, there was a crisis of free market capitalism. People like, Calvin Coolidge and President Harding of the 1920s were a thing of the past. Those are the people who were hardline, what we would call today libertarian economists, free market economy with very little and no government intervention whatsoever. President Hoover, actually, who is often accused of being the most insensitive to the suffering of many unemployed people in the United States, was actually the most liberal of the three Republican presidents that I mentioned, Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. But anyways, they were defeated. You know, the idea of a planned economy was the idea that came out of World War One. It dominated the 1920s and 1930s, and it came in several versions, variations. There was a Soviet planned economy, the Stalin's 5 years plan, which was a complete government control of the economy. There was Hitler and Mussolini's planned economy, which was not complete government control of the economy, but government regulates and ensures against the labor problems, labor issues, strikes, and work stoppages and things of that sort. So, as you can imagine, you know, even though Hitler's party was called the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany, if you're a worker in Germany and you try to organize some sort of industrial action against the leaders of industry, Hitler didn't abolish private property like Stalin did. So, yeah, they find you in the ditch later on. So, anyways, and there was Roosevelt, who also advocated a government takeover of the economy through various agencies, huge investments. You know, examples of this: Tennessee Valley Authority, building dams on the Tennessee River in the South, trying to industrialize the agrarian South, and many other agencies that, you know, national parks, building cabins here and there, you know, government subsidies for artists, you name it. So that was a core of Roosevelt's New Deal. So, you know, when you think about it, at the time of World War II, none of the belligerent states advocated any sort of free market economy. That would happen later on. You'll see when we get to the last chapter, the Reagan Revolution. But none of them, you know, the government of Japan also advocated a strict state control, even though a lot of, you know, Japanese firms were privately owned. So anyways, this is the program of New Deal, and this is related to number 3, Huey Long. Huey Long is a very interesting character. The governor of Louisiana, who thought that Roosevelt was too conservative. And Huey Long's slogan was "Every man is a king." And he advocated something that we hear these days again. I never thought I would hear it in my lifetime, but we're hearing it again. One aspect of Huey Long's program was guaranteed income. So, that all people should be guaranteed certain income. As you know, this is a very, very controversial idea, and a lot of people, you know, including myself, are very ambiguous towards the idea. You know, on the one hand, you know, it'd be nice to get guaranteed income from the government. You know, it was nice when they sent the checks when they were selling during the pandemic. They send you a couple of $1,000s a check and things of that sort. So there are more problematic aspects of this. Who's going to pay for it? Well, Huey Long, of course, then as now, saying that, you know, or the billionaires and millionaires are going to pay for it. The problem with that approach is that if you take the money from the people who are making it. The Elon Musk's and Jeff Bezos of our time. If you take money from them and distribute it to the poor, they're gonna lose the incentive to make the money. So they're gonna stop making money. And this is what Milton Friedman famously said. The problem with this redistribution of wealth is eventually you run out of other people's money. So Huey Long proposed a draconian limitations on income in United States. I don't know. I mean, you can look at the numbers in $10, but an equivalent would be, roughly a ballpark figure that nobody should make, for example, more than $1 million a year. That's the max. And compare that with the profit of great corporations like Apple or Amazon, which often goes into hundreds of billions, if not trillion dollars. So Bezos made all these billions, and we take those billions and give him just 1 million, and that's enough for you. Thank you very much for running this stuff, and then we give the rest of it to everybody as a guaranteed income. Roosevelt didn't like the idea. And not many people actually liked the idea, except for a couple of poor farmers in Louisiana who were desperately poor, said, "Wow, this guaranteed income is a nice thing." And Huey Long is the kingfish. That's what they call him in Louisiana. He was killed. His supporters to this day say that it was Roosevelt who killed him. Just don't quote me on this, right? Well, you can quote me on this. Just this is hearsay. That's this is not hard evidence. So, anyways, Huey Long, a very, very interesting figure and an example of radical New Deal. A lot of people, when the Great Depression started, especially when Roosevelt won, and his victory was a little bit unexpected, because Hoover was, in spite of the bad reputation that was created mostly by Roosevelt, was a relatively popular guy, and he was a decent person. I mean, one of the greatest things that Hoover did in his life was humanitarian aid after World War I to Europe and elsewhere, especially after the pandemic of the Spanish flu. So anyways, he was not a heartless person. But Roosevelt liked to make fun of him, and that stuck. But especially after 2 years of Roosevelt's administration, the more radical factions within the Democratic Party made considerable electoral victories. The communists, the social democrats, the Huey Long people, they were, you name it. And so Roosevelt was, forced for some time to move more radically in terms of government control. And anyways, then came World War II to sort of settle this issue. And it was settled in a very, very Roosevelt way. That is, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was such a character. He, I think one of the most unprincipled men in U.S. politics. What I'm saying by this, I don't mean this as a criticism, but as saying that he really had no principles. He just would go around and say, "Oh, is this going to work? Let's make a deal. Put people around the table, let them negotiate, and make it work." And if it works, he was for it. If it doesn't work, he was against it. So in that sense, he was not very ideological. We had presidents who were, very ideological. For example, Calvin Coolidge was a big free marketeer libertarian. So, anyways, and very, very, very dogmatic in that sense. No, Franklin Roosevelt was not like that. And when the war started with Pearl Harbor, right, in December of 1941, he said, "Okay, we're going to need this much steel, this much tanks, this much jeep vehicles, and other motorized and armored vehicles. This is this much planes. We're going to need this and so forth." And he went basically to the people in Detroit, which was the largest industrial center in the country of the time. It was Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Chicago. Those were the big ones. And said, "Okay, you want me to force you to make these things, or are you going to do it on your own?" And he said, "No, we're going to do it on our own," basically, summarize the whole thing. And so the private owners, Dodge, Ford, General Motors, and other corporations, that they retained ownership of their manufacturing, but they started working for the federal government. So that's Roosevelt's idea how to do it, and you can't argue with success. It works. It worked. He won the war. So, anyways, so this is the economics part. The other things that you have here in IDs number 4 and number 5 is the military aspect of World War II. America was dragged into the war. So that's an important point. The coalition that existed between United States, United Kingdom, and USSR was not the coalition of the willing. What we call the United Nations that sit down there at the coalition also included the Republic of China, which was a Chinese state before the People's Republic of China, so the non-communist China, right? So the Republic of China. So these were the allies, right? United Kingdom, United States, USSR, China, and France. France was defeated and occupied by Hitler, but it had free forces, and it had the colonial empire, which kind of continued to operate as part of France. So, what I'm trying to say there is this coalition was not a coalition of the willing. Originally, for example, Republic of China was dragged into the war because Japan supported the imperial family of China. That's how it started and developed into a rivalry between Japan and China, and the war between Republic of China and the Empire of Japan, and so on and so forth. So that was going on in Asia, in China, very independent from the rest of World War II. This was going on since the 1930s. Namely, in 1910 there was a revolution in China. They kick out the last empire, and the empire was from the Manchu region in the north of China. And the imperial family ran over there and created a little state for their own. There was, they refused to acknowledge the republic. And the Japanese empire, being an empire itself, right, they held them out, and so on and so forth. And so there was, these are a lot of these, these are issues that are kind of outside of the scope of American history, but we got dragged into it. President Roosevelt in particular supported the Republic of China and its leader Chiang Kai-shek quite a lot. And a lot of Americans did. Chiang Kai-shek was the darling of American politicians. And a foreign leader who is a darling of American politicians usually don't end well. I don't know why is that, but the statistics, I think, would argue in my favor. Um, while Japanese and Chinese were fighting for the control of China, and the Japanese were saying, well, no, 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 we're not really trying to occupy China, we're just trying to restore the imperial family to China. So, of course, this was not true. But anyways, war is deceit. So, one of the things to watch out when you write about war is that, don't take anything on the face value. So, anyways, these two factions fought each other. Americans supported the Republic of China, and the Japanese resented it. As a part of that resentment, they attacked Pearl Harbor because they thought that America had already taken side and it's already at war with the Empire of Japan. The events in Europe didn't steer President Roosevelt's heart that much. And not just President Roosevelt, but American hearts were relatively cool. Yeah. There were a couple of demonstrations here in New York. There's a famous episode when a French opera singer sang famously Marseillaise in the Metropolitan Opera when France capitulated to the Germans in 1940. Signaling that France is going to live and resist, but other than that, there was much more sympathy towards the plight of Great Britain. But Britain also had an evacuations plan in World War II, that in case Hitler is successful, the government of Great Britain would be moved to Canada. That was the plan. Anyways, so as I said, World War II started in 1939, and America entered the war in December of 1941. So good 2 and something years later. That's very important to know, that there was a war in Europe going on for 2 years and America did nothing. And when America decided to do something was when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. This attack on Pearl Harbor was also very, very interesting. It happened in the middle of the great German offensive on Moscow. In 1941, in June of 1941, particularly on 22nd of June of 1941, Hitler attacked Soviet Union, which is the largest, that attack, Plan Barbarossa, was the largest military operation ever conceived in the history of the world. Millions of people in the German army, mechanized tanks, heavily armed airplanes attacked the Soviet Union, caught them by surprise. And from June, August, September, October, November, by December, and that's about 6 months, right? They were in front of Moscow. They were 14 kilometers outside of Kremlin. 14 kilometers, about 10 miles. That's from Elizabeth to downtown Manhattan. So, give you an idea how close the Hitler's army got to Moscow. And then came the attack on Pearl Harbor in December. And Stalin was relieved because he knew that Soviet Union is not going to be attacked by Japan. In other words, Japan is not going to attack the Soviet Union because it started the war in America, and it's not going to start another war with the Soviet Union. And Soviet Union had millions of troops on the Japanese Soviet border, which is now Chinese Soviet border because Japanese were in China. So connect the dots there from what I was talking earlier. And when that happened, he withdrew several hundred thousands of these troops, put them on a Trans-Siberian Railroad, take them to Moscow, And those fresh troops in Moscow in December were able to push Germans back from Moscow about 200 kilometers back west. So that was great significance of Pearl Harbor. You'll see in the questions there are a lot of issues with Pearl Harbor. One of the issues is, did Roosevelt allow it to happen on purpose? And so I don't think it was allowed on purpose. That's that's a little bit of an exaggeration. But there there are people who believe that and who argue that. But I would say that his policies in China and supporting the Republic of China and being so vigorously anti-Japanese contributed to the beginning of the war. Now, be that as it may, the war started, and you have two great commanders over there of American troops, Dwight Eisenhower in Europe and Douglas MacArthur in the Pacific. And I would like you to look at these people a little bit and kind of, not just for the purpose of, knowing who they are and who was their mother and father. That's probably the least relevant. But what did they do on the European front, and what did they do on the front in the Pacific? So, anyways, I think this is a very, very long one. I've been talking a lot, and I thought I won't be able to do it because of coughing, but apparently something happened, a miracle. So I'll stop here. This is a long introduction, and I'm sure you're going to appreciate it because this is a heavy chapter. You have two big topics: Great Depression and World War II. And so, good luck with those. Good luck with the questions. The questions, I covered a lot of these questions, explained to you. One of my advice about these questions is, if you can't answer it, find some keywords and Google them. And that will actually take you to where I and how I created the question. They will take you to a place. In most cases, it will take you to the textbook, but in some cases, not to the textbook, somewhere outside of textbook, anyways. There is question 8, Huey Long, Share Our Wealth program, which said capping personal fortunes at 50 million and limiting annual income to 1 million and inheritances to 5 million. Resulting funds would be used to guarantee every family a minimum annual income of $2,000 to $3,000. Today, the annual income is probably around $30,000, $25,000 to $35,000. So if you want to, these are the then dollars, right? The 1930s dollars. And if you want to get to, there are a couple of websites that you can actually tell you, in 1931, $2,000 was equivalent of, I don't know, $47,000 today. I think that for $2,000, yeah, you could. I'm not sure if you could buy a house for that kind of money, but it's equivalent probably today of $45,000. So you could buy a good chunk of a house. Anyways, right. This difference between the Republic of China and eventually the People's Republic of China. We'll get back to this difference of what's the difference between the Republic of China, which is now Taiwan. The only thing that is left from the Republic of China is Taiwan. The mainland China was taken over by the People's Republic of China and the Communist Party of China. Anyways, so that's about it. A little bit about Hitler's policies of genocide, not just towards the Jews, but towards people, making a living space for Germans in Eastern Europe, and that's often called the Lebensraum or living space. So anyways, that's about it. That's all what I have for you today, guys. And I look forward to talking to you if you decide to show up on our daily meetings. High noon. We see each other. Good luck with the new chapter, and see you tomorrow. Bye.